What's up everyone, Kamal, Akeel here, and today I'm going to show you guys how to change oil on a Nissan 350Z. So obviously the first thing is to get the car on jack stands because it's pretty low. So I looked up jacking points online. You can just Google Nissan 350Z jack points, and if you look at the images you'll see obviously you have the pinch welds on the left and right side, but there's also a jacking point in the middle and the front, and then the rear differential as well. I had my concerns about jacking the car up from the rear diff, so I did some research on it, and it's no problem because obviously no one wants to crack or damage the differential housing. And then to get to the front jacking point, the car is pretty low, like I said, so my dad had some old ceiling tiles, so we kind of staggered them like a ramp and just drove the car up on there. And then obviously the other way to do this is just to go to Lowe's or Home Depot and just get some wood, some 2x4s or something like that. So yeah, so it's easier in my opinion to do the front first, then the rear. And obviously just have your handbrake on and the car in first gear, so once you lift the front it won't want to roll around. And then also you can use wheel chocks on the rear wheels as well. So yeah. Alright, so we actually just finished changing the oil, but I figured I'd show you what I use now, so you don't realize you're stuck without something you need halfway through. So obviously I have a jack and some 4 jack stands. Once you get it up in the air, you're going to want to take the under panel off to get to the drain plug and oil filter. With that I just have a normal gun, and all the screws for the under body panel are 10mm, so you just need one of those. And then the drain plug itself is a 14mm socket, and then I just have a normal ratchet and I put a little extension on there to break it loose. And then to go back on, I have a torque wrench, which we torqued it to 27 foot-pounds. I think the spec was something like 15 to 29. You can choose whatever you want. And then just a standard oil filter wrench to get the old oil filter off. And then we just put it back on by hand. I think it's like 15 to 21 Newton meters is the spec, but I always just snug them down by hand. And then obviously just rags, safety glasses, flashlight makes it easier. And then I have some brake clean. You can buy like disposable cans of it at Advanced Auto Parts. That way when we're done putting the drain plug and the oil filter back, you can spray it down and clean it up. So that way once you add oil and run it, when you recheck for leaks, it's nice and clean, and you can tell easily if maybe the oil filter was double gasketed or something like that. And then we also have just a normal drain bucket, which I also just got from Advanced Auto Parts. And then also once you're done draining it, you can take this back to them and dispose of it there. The last time I did do that, they didn't charge me anything to dispose of the oil, so that's nice. But yeah, that's everything you need, so there you go. Getting the car on jack stands is obviously the most dangerous part of doing this kind of thing, so you just want to be as safe as possible. And if you aren't sure about something, just try to ask somebody that would know, or just even have somebody help you out with it. So I'll show you guys the jacking point up front, which is where we started. So if you see right here, these 2 bolts, pretty much you put the jack right here and lift the front from this point, which is basically in line with just your front track line. And so we had the jack stands at the lowest point, so you just get them on the jacks at the lowest point here, because you don't want to go up too high in front first and then not be able to get the jack under the rear to get to the diff. So then we came back here to the rear diff to jack the car up here, and I have a rag on the jack as well, just so it's not metal on metal, because you know, nobody wants to damage the rear diff. And then once we got it on the lowest point here on the jack stands, I went back up to the front of the vehicle again, jacked it up higher, and then lifted the jack stands up, and then came back to the rear a second time to jack the rear up to the same height. The more gradually you do it, the safer it is. You don't want to go to an extreme on either end, just so it's you know, you don't want the car to fall on you. So obviously we're changing the oil. You do want the car to be warm, or the engine to be warm when you're doing this, just because it helps the oil drain faster. But obviously don't have the car running while you're putting it on the jack stands, because then your oil pickup tube might not be sucking up enough oil to feed your engine if you have it tipped way backwards or forwards. So either have the car running before you get it on the jack stands, or just run the car after you get it on the jack stands before you drain the oil. And then obviously you want to take off your oil cap. I mean, the oil will still drain out if you don't do that, but it drains out much more quickly if you do. And then when you're under the car, I mean, I wear safety glasses. You don't have to, but the day you have something get in your eyes is the day you'll probably start wearing safety glasses. So next step is obviously we gotta get this plastic cover off, which you'll see these little 10mm screws, or if you have just a Phillips, it'll go in the middle of it. So we'll zap these off. Alright, so after you get the plastic cover off, you can see the oil drain plug right here, and then also the oil filter is right here. So we'll just start by taking the drain plug out. The oil drain plug is a 14mm, so just break that loose. Alright, cool. So we're letting the oil drain right now, and I got an oil filter just from the Nissan dealership, and you can ask for a new crush washer for your drain plug. I'm trying to get this one off right now. You can tell it hasn't been replaced in a long time by the fact that it's super crushed, but it's better to get it off than to have two crush rings on it. So that's what we're doing right now. So now we're just gonna screw the oil filter off, and for that I just have a generic oil filter wrench. So after you take the old oil filter off, I always just make sure that the rubber gasket around it didn't stick to the side of the oil pan, or the block I mean, because if you double gasket that, it'll definitely leak on you. I've only seen it stick once in my whole life of working on cars, so it's not something that happens often, but I always just check. So before we put the new oil filter on, I always just coat the seal, the rubber seal, with some fresh oil. And then before I put the new filter on, I just wiped down the surface here. It was just dirty. I don't know how long it's been since the oil's been changed, so Just wipe down that surface. So on the oil filter itself, it says to tighten it down to 15 to 21 Newton meters. I always just tighten it down by hand. And then for the drain plug, it's same thing. I just wipe down the area, and it's pretty, I don't know, it's possible that the crush washer could actually be stuck on the oil pan as well, so just check to make sure there's not one there. And then just put your new crush washer on the drain plug. Start it by hand. And then then I have a torque wrench to torque it down, and I think the spec is like 15 to 29 or something, so I'm just gonna do it to 27 foot-pounds. So and while you're doing this, you can actually see the crush washer compressing. So before we put the under panel back on, I'm just gonna put the oil in it and then run it just to make sure nothing's leaking down there. The manual says that it takes 5 quarts with the oil filter replacement, so I'm just putting in 5W30 fully synthetic oil. So then before I run the car, I'll just make sure that, check the level now. There's a L and a H, which I guess just stands for low and high, in this little grid here, so you can, it's hard to see because the oil is pretty clear, but it is at the high marks. So now that we put oil in it, you want to make sure you take it out of gear. And then just run it for 30 seconds to a minute, and then recheck the dipstick to make sure the oil level is right. The reason we do that is because since we put a new oil filter on it, there's no oil ran through it. I mean, it's not much space to hold oil, but that's just the general routine of how you do an oil change. So we'll just let it run and then recheck the dipstick. So you always wipe the dipstick off once and then put it back after the car's been running. It's gives you a more accurate reading. Yeah, it's just under the high mark, so that's good. So now we've ran the car and checked the dipstick for the right oil level, and that's all good, and we just checked to make sure there's no leaks, and it's clean under here, so now we know we can put the underbody panel back on. So when I put underbody panels on, I like to just get them all in by hand, so now it's being held up, and then tighten them all down, because if you start tightening them down one by one, you might realize you can't get one of the screws in on the opposite side because you need to have it a little bit loose to adjust it. So I just put them all in by hand first and then zap them all down. So